Hey everyone, and welcome back to Making My Own Lane. I'm coming to you after what has been one of my most adventurous trips yet. 10 incredible days exploring Kentucky, and let me tell you, this state absolutely blew me away. I've got caves that push my limits, bourbon that educated my palate, and campgrounds that made me feel right at home. So grab your favorite beverage and settle in because we're about to take a journey through the heart of Kentucky together. Kentucky produces 95% of the world's bourbon, and the state is home to more barrels of bourbon than people. Think about that for a minute. When I started this RVing journey, I told myself I'd explore this beautiful country 200 miles at a time. Sometimes that means discovering hidden gems right in your own backyard, and sometimes it means pushing yourself into completely unfamiliar territory. This Kentucky trip, it was definitely the latter, and I couldn't be more grateful for every challenging, educational, and downright fun moment of it. My first stop was the Thousand Trails Diamond Caverns campground, and here's the beautiful thing about it. It's actually located right inside Mammoth Cave National Park. Can you believe that? I was parked inside a national park. Because it's part of my Thousand Trails membership, those 10 nights didn't cost me an extra penny, which meant more money in my pocket for bourbon tastings. Always thinking ahead, right? Being inside the park boundaries meant I was literally minutes away from some of the most spectacular cave systems in the world. Every morning I'd wake up knowing I was about to descend into the earth and explore formations that took millions of years to create. There's something humbling about that, you know? Now, I've done quite a few cave tours over the past couple of years, and I thought I knew what I was getting into. Boy, was I wrong. This year, I challenged myself with 4 more tours at Mammoth Cave, but it was the Violet City Cave Lantern Tour that really tested my limits. Picture this. You're carrying a lantern, just like explorers did over a century ago. The flickering light creates shadows that dance on the cave walls, and you're following paths that early cave explorers carved out by hand. It sounds romantic and adventurous, doesn't it? Well, it is, until you hit those steep hills. Let me paint you a picture of what challenging terrain really means down there. We're talking about navigating incredibly steep hills, both going up and coming down on what can only be described as dry, slippery, hard-packed dirt. And here's the kicker. There's absolutely nothing to grab onto for support. No handrails, no convenient rock formations, no helpful tree roots, just you, your lantern, and your determination not to take a tumble in front of a group of strangers. I'll be honest with you, there were moments when I wondered what the heck I'd gotten myself into. My legs were shaking, not just from the exertion, but from the concentration it took to place each foot carefully on that treacherous surface. And here's the part that's hardest to admit. During that last half mile of the 3-mile tour, I needed help. While other hikers seemed to navigate those treacherous hills like billy goats, I was struggling. Thankfully, someone in our group took pity on me and helped me up and down those steep sections. There's something very humbling about accepting help when you're used to being fiercely independent. But you know what? That kindness from a stranger made the experience even more meaningful. That tour by far was the most physically demanding cave experience I've had in 2 years of exploring. And it taught me that pushing yourself doesn't always mean doing it completely alone. Sometimes the real adventure is knowing when to accept help gracefully and still feeling proud of what you accomplished. If you're planning to do the Violet City Lantern Tour, here's my advice. Wear your best hiking boots. Bring some confidence, and maybe do a few extra squats before you go. Your legs will thank you later, but absolutely do it. It's an experience you'll never forget. What many people don't realize about Mammoth Cave is that it's not just one cave. It's the world's longest known cave system, with over 400 miles mapped so far. The cave has been forming for millions of years, carved out by the Green River and its tributaries, working their way through the limestone bedrock. But here's something that really struck me. The human history of those caves goes back thousands of years. Native Americans were exploring and using these caves long before European settlers arrived. They left behind artifacts, drawings, and evidence of their presence that archaeologists are still discovering today. Standing in those passageways, holding that lantern, I couldn't help but think about all the people who had walked those same paths before me. Native Americans seeking shelter or resources, early settlers exploring by torchlight, And now travelers like us seeking adventure and connection to something larger than ourselves. After all that exploration, it was time to start what many people consider the heart of Kentucky, the Bourbon Trail. Now, let me set the record straight. There are currently 57 to 60 distilleries on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, spread across the state. Most are within 100 miles of Louisville, making it absolutely perfect for RV travel when you plan your route right. But I wasn't just randomly hopping from distillery to distillery. No, I had done my homework and planned this bourbon education carefully. My first stop was Balanced Distillery, which holds a very special place in Kentucky bourbon history. Walking into Balanced Distillery felt like stepping back in time. This is a privately owned operation, the kind of place where you can still feel the passion and craftsmanship that goes into every bottle. But here's what makes Balance truly special. They hold the trademark for Mammoth Cave bourbon. How cool is that? Getting to see those old copper stills up close was like getting a masterclass in American craftsmanship. My guide walked me through the entire process from grain to glass. And I learned that they just don't make bourbon here. They're also crafting rum and gin and moonshine. Each spirit requires its own techniques, its own timing, its own particular attention to detail. And what really impressed me was the education I got about the bourbon making process. I mean, I thought I knew the basics: corn, water, yeast, and time, but there's so much more to it. The type of grain, the specific strain of yeast, the char level on the barrels, the location where those barrels age, and even the weather patterns during aging, it all affects the final product. It's part science, part art, and part pure Kentucky magic. And here's a fun fact that bourbon lovers will appreciate. Balanced Distillery's Mammoth Cave bourbon is sold in the gift shop at Mammoth Cave National Park, making it one of only 2 national parks in the entire country that sell local alcohol in their gift shops. I, of course, had to take a bottle home with me, supporting local business and taking home a piece of Kentucky history. That's what I call a win-win. My second stop was Buffalo Trace, and this is where the trip planning really paid off. I had signed up in advance for something called the Flood Tour. And let me tell you, getting into this tour was like winning the bourbon lottery. They only ran it 6 times, and I managed to snag a spot on the very last one. Now, getting there was its own adventure. I'm traveling with a 41-foot total rig. That's my motorhome and my towed car combined. And maneuvering into Buffalo Trace's RV parking lot took some serious concentration, especially with the festival going on that day. The lines to get into the distillery were incredibly long, snaking around the parking area like something you'd see at a theme park. But here's where the magic of trip planning and a little RV ingenuity came in handy. Buffalo Trace has a trolley service that picks up folks from the RV lot. But because I was running close to my tour time, they drove me over separately and escorted me right to the front of the line.
That you're a little bit close on time. So as soon as I make this tour over here, we're going to walk you up to the front door and we're going to get you VIP front door treatment.
Oh my goodness, thank you. That sounds awesome.
So wonderful.
Talk about VIP treatment. Sometimes being a solo female traveler in an RV has its advantages. People tend to want to help you out. The flood tour itself was extraordinary. It was run by the general manager, so we were getting information straight from the top. We learned about the devastating 1937 flood that nearly destroyed the distillery, how they rebuilt, and how that experience shaped their approach to bourbon making and helped them recover from the most recent and worst flooding in April of this year, 2025.
However, this is one of the most affected areas by the flood. This water came through here, and if you look through there, you can see some tanks, a lot of intricate...
Tasting at the end included some expressions you can't get anywhere else, and the stories behind each pour made them taste even better. Here's a pro tip for anyone planning their own Bourbon Trail adventure. Look for those daily specials at each distillery. You can save serious money on bottles, and sometimes you'll find limited releases that aren't available anywhere else. Moving from the cave country toward Lexington, I set up camp at Kentucky Horse Park State Park Campground. At $45 a night with my AAA discount, it was an absolute steal for the quality and location. The campground has 2 double horseshoe-shaped loops, plus a larger area for group camping, so there's plenty of space, and it never felt crowded. What impressed me the most about this campground was the attention to detail. The camp store was well stocked with both camping necessities and tourist items. You know, those little souvenirs that help you remember a great trip, like stickers. And get this, they even had tennis courts. I didn't play tennis, but I appreciated that they thought about offering activities beyond just a place to park your RV. Being at Kentucky Horse Park put me right in the heart of bluegrass country. And let me tell you, driving through those rolling hills with their pristine white fences and beautiful horses was like driving through a postcard. There's something about this landscape that just speaks to your soul. All that green grass, those gentle hills, and horses grazing peacefully in pastures that seem to stretch on forever. The next morning, I started at Woodford Reserve, and I have to admit, I was surprised. After the crowds at Buffalo Trace, I was expecting long lines and chaos. Instead, I walked right in, no wait at all. Sometimes the Bourbon Trail gods just smile on you. I had booked what they called a senses tour, and this was unlike any whiskey tasting I'd ever experienced. Instead of just sipping different bourbons and trying to identify flavors, they paired each whiskey with specific foods that brought out completely different taste notes. It was like discovering that bourbon could transform depending on what you paired it with. For example, when I tasted their double oaked expression with a piece of dark chocolate, suddenly I could taste vanilla and caramel notes that had been hiding. Pair that same bourbon with a salted pretzel, and boom, completely different flavor profile. It was a revelation that bourbon isn't just about the liquid in the glass, it's about the entire experience, including what flavors you combine it with.
Bourbon aged vanilla, chocolate bitters, brown sugar with a little simple syrup. Get a cinnamon stick, shave some off, and drop the stick in the glass.
Perfect.
Bread,
Thank you.
The education didn't stop with the tasting. Woodford Reserve is housed in a beautiful historic distillery, and walking through those buildings, you can feel the weight of history. This is where bourbon has been made for generations, using techniques that have been refined over decades.
It's called the dryer house. The dryer house is where you take the spent grains from the first distillation. They used to lay them out, dry them out, and give them back to the farmer. Now we get that product wet.
With a couple of hours to kill before my next tour, I decided to treat myself to lunch at Ricardo's in Versailles. Now, Versailles is pronounced Versailles in Kentucky, not like the place in France. I learned that one the hard way. Ricardo's is housed in an old train station, and eating there felt like stepping back into a different era. The restaurant has maintained so much of the original character of the building. High ceilings, old brick walls and windows that look out onto what used to be the railway platform. The food was incredible, but more than that, it was the atmosphere and the service that really got to me. Here I was, a solo traveler in my 60s, sitting in a historic train station, having just spent the morning learning about bourbon, with another distillery tour ahead of me. This is exactly the kind of experience I hoped for when I started this RVing journey. I also wanted to stop at Castle and Key, which is formerly known as the Old Taylor Distillery and listed as one of the top distillery tours. But this is where trip planning taught me a valuable lesson. It was Monday, and Castle and Key is closed to tours on Mondays and Tuesdays. I drove by anyway just to see the property, and let me tell you, it's stunning. The architecture alone is worth a drive-by, even if you can't get in on a tour. This is one of those moments that reminds you that even with the best planning, sometimes things don't work out the way you expect. But that's okay. It just means I have a reason to come back to Kentucky sooner rather than later. Castle and Key is definitely going on my must-visit list for the next time. My final distillery tour of this trip was Glenns Creek, another smaller, privately owned operation that had taken over the old Crow Distillery building some years back. This was a much more intimate experience, just a small group of us for a tasting and question and answer session with the owner and head distiller. What struck me immediately was how different their bourbons tasted compared to the others I tried. The Glenns Creek expressions were sharper, spicier, with more bite to them. It was a great reminder that even though all these distilleries are making bourbon in Kentucky using similar base ingredients, the final products can be dramatically different based on their specific recipes, aging techniques, and production methods. The distiller explained that they prefer a higher rye content in their mash bill, which gives their bourbon that spicier profile. They also use a different char level on their barrels and age their whiskey in a specific part of their warehouses, where temperature fluctuations are more dramatic. All of these factors combine to create a bourbon that's distinctively theirs. During the question and answer session, I learned about some of the challenges that smaller distilleries face. They can't produce the volume that the big names do, But that also means that they can experiment more, take more risks, and create more unique expressions. It's a trade-off, but for bourbon lovers, it means that there are always new flavors and new experiences to discover. One thing I want to mention is the drive between these distilleries, because the journey is just as much of a part of the experience as the destinations. On the road to Glens Creek, I passed several massive brick warehouses owned by Jim Beam. These aren't just storage buildings. They're where millions of gallons of bourbon are quietly aged, developing the flavor that will eventually make their way to glasses around the world. There's something almost meditative about driving through Kentucky bourbon country. You'll see horses grazing peacefully, old tobacco barns weathering gracefully, signs pointing to distilleries, both famous and obscure. It's the kind of scenery that makes you want to slow down, roll down the windows, and just soak it all in. By the end of my Bourbon Trail experience, I realized just how much I had learned, not just about the spirits themselves, but about Kentucky culture, history, and craftsmanship. Kentucky produces 95% of the world's bourbon, and the state is home to more barrels of bourbon than people. Think about that for a minute. There are literally millions of barrels aging in warehouses across Kentucky right now. But beyond the numbers, what really impressed me was the passion that everyone involved in the bourbon production brings to their work. From the farmers growing the corn, to the master distillers blending the final products, to the people pouring in the tastings. There's a craftsmanship that you can taste in every sip. I also learned that both Buffalo Trace and Woodford Reserve offer multiple different tours, each with different themes and different whiskeys to try. The offerings rotate, so if you went back on a different day, you could have a completely different experience. That's something I'm definitely keeping in mind for future trips. One thing I didn't get to do this time, but that's high on my list for my next visit, is tasting bourbon directly from the barrel. Several distilleries offer this experience where you can taste the unfiltered barrel-proof spirit before it gets bottled. From everything I've heard, it's a completely different experience from tasting the finished product. Let me talk for a minute about the practical side of these adventures, because I know cost is a consideration for many of us. This Kentucky trip was remarkably affordable, especially considering everything I experienced. My Thousand Trails membership meant 10 nights of camping costing me nothing extra. The AAA discount that saved me money at Kentucky Horse Park, looking for daily specials at the distilleries, meant I brought home bottles at prices I couldn't have gotten at home. Even that challenging cave tour cost less than a nice dinner out with my National Park Senior Pass. Adventure doesn't have to be expensive. It requires some planning, some flexibility, and some willingness to do your homework. But incredible experiences are within reach of most budgets. The key is prioritizing experiences over things, being strategic about where you spend your money, and taking advantage of memberships and discounts that can add up to significant savings. I hope this video inspires you to plan some of your own Kentucky adventures, whether you're interested in caves or bourbon, or just want to experience the genuine hospitality of the Bluegrass State. There's something there for everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep proving to yourself that the best adventures are still ahead of you. Safe travels, everyone, and I'll see you on the road.